All right, welcome in. Okay, so while we get started tonight, I got 12 handouts, and there might be more than 12 of y'all. Sorry. So share with a neighbor. Okay, and by means of what's the word I'm looking for? Confession. Confession time for the pastor. It's good for my soul. I have been so busy, y'all, and I wish I had another 4 weeks to work on this. I realized very quickly that you can do a PhD on these chapters alone, and so the amount of research, the depth of material, the symbolism, and the function of the tabernacle. I mean, there are whole books, right, written on this topic. So, if you're watching online, here's what we're going to do tonight. We are going to... I printed my notes. Where did they go? Oh, I guarantee you they are on the copier. Oh, you all think it's funny, don't you? Okay. Yeah, you mind going? Thank you. Okay, check this copier. It's going to be like a Word document, single page. Okay, did I mention I was so busy? Okay, I printed my notes. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Josh is going to get his notes. Step 1. And then step 2 is I have, we've been looking at those Bible Project videos occasionally. And last week we recapped with chapters 1 through 18. That company that does those has divided Exodus into 2. So we'll watch 19 through 40. We will meet one more time. We'll meet next week, and that'll wrap up Exodus. Now, to be clear, we will not have read all of Exodus, right? So some of the impetus for finishing this is on you. And you go home and you do the homework, right? No, we're not doing Leviticus is a really interesting book, but we won't do it next. We're gonna take a break for the summer. In August-ish, we'll come back and we'll pick up Matthew, which will be obviously the gospel story of Jesus, and it'll be very, I think, familiar to us now that we've walked through Exodus. Okay, so tonight we're going to look at Exodus kind of 20, oh my gosh, my notes, I swear, Exodus 20 through 31, and then next week we'll look at the golden calf, which is Exodus 32, and that'll kind of finish up things. So, also by way of confession, my daughter is in the room back here, and then was kind enough to take my other daughter to a softball game, and then a staff member took my son to Little League practice, and my wife is still out of town. I was trying to get my children to bed last night and watch the Pacers game at the same time. And it wasn't happening. It was a great game. Okay. Yeah, man, it was very reminiscent of like 1995 Reggie Miller in Madison Square Garden.
On Facebook today, they had pictures where they compared.
Oh, they compared those games? Yeah. Okay, so I want to kind of talk about the material in front of you before we get started. And we'll pray and we'll get started. So I'm going to do this with my microphone. It's very good. Okay. So this is called the Rose Book of Bible Charts, Maps, and Timelines. It is a very, I will say these words, it's a very conservative resource. And so never say that your pastor never uses conservative stuff. I use liberal sources, and I use conservative sources, and I use everything in between. So they take things very literally in these materials, which I think is very helpful for when you come to a section like the tabernacle, when it's like, no, they're not there. It's great. I'll pull it up on my phone or something. No, I don't need any notes. I'll do it live. I'll do it. Does someone have my notes? Did it get? No, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. I know I hit print. Oh, it's going to drive me bonkers. That's okay. Maybe. No? Oh, it's okay. Anyway, if you happen to find a plain document with some bullet points, those are my notes. Anyways, so the material is very literal. So when it says like the tabernacle was made of woven goat hair, like the material will show you that, where I would be like, who cares, but they're going to say, no, it really matters. And I really appreciate scholarship like that because it helps me then see the scope of what we're really looking at. So I hope it's helpful. It's a lot of material, and we're going to walk through it together, like I want to say casually, right? We're gonna walk through the park together, holding hands, taking a look at this, and pointing out the beautiful foliage, right? And saying, do you see the leaves? Aren't they beautiful this time of year? And I think it'll be really helpful because I've studied this before in undergrad. I've studied it at both my seminaries, and as I return to it again, I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I think you could spend a lifetime studying it. And we can talk about the significance of it. And I might say, yeah, I don't know. And you might say, well, what about? And I'm going to say, maybe. So I think it'll be helpful. All right. So can I begin with a word of prayer for us this evening? Would that be all right? Holy and gracious God, as we gather here, oh my goodness, and as we gather online, and as we take a breath, we have the joy of sitting together, the joy of encountering you. God, we can begin to wonder what it would have been like to wander and to see strange sights. A pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, to be led by your presence, to have bread and water provided somehow in the middle of nowhere, and to sense you with us. God, that same sense of you and your presence is with us here this evening. And so guide our conversation, guide our questioning and our wondering, our probing, and our curiosities as we encounter you again. Pray this in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so by way of recap a little bit, shall we? You might disagree with some of my categorizations, and that's fine. So chapter 1, right? Israelites are oppressed. Chapter 2, Moses, his kind of childlike years. Chapter 3 is God calls Moses. That's the burning bush. Chapter 4 is Moses given signs. Chapters 5 through 11. Excuse me, that's just water. Okay. As Israel is promised deliverance and the plagues. Chapters 12 through 13, that's the Passover stuff, like the whole entire death of the firstborn and the here's how you make the Passover meal. It's a recipe book. And then chapter 14 through 15 is crossing the Red Sea or crossing the Reed Sea. Right, this is where Pharaoh's heart is hardened and God shows up and drowns the Egyptians. And, God tells Moses, just be still. You need to do nothing. God will fight for you. Moses says, okie dokie. Chapter 16 through 17 is they make it. Right, they get to the other side. Egypt is vanquished. We don't hear about them again until much later in the Bible, right? And so they're wandering in the desert, or the wilderness, whatever your translation says. And they're hungry. Go figure. There's no McDonald's, there's no Burger King, there's no Taco Bell, there's no Walmarts, right? They're like, we forgot to pack enough snacks. And so bread is provided, and water is provided. And then they begin to wonder how in the world they're going to do life together. And so that's the whole entire chapters 18 through 20-ish. That's the commandments and the law. This is Moses goes up on Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. God gives Moses the law, the 10 utterances or the 10 words. And of course there's more than 10, but there's 10, right? And then Moses takes those, comes down and tells the people how we're going to do it. And then there's these big chunks of the text that we've alluded to and you've heard about, right? Chapters 21 through 31 are going to be about tabernacle and law, and they're sort of intertwined at certain times where, like, okay, God tells Moses, make the tent like this. And then they're going to say, and when you make offerings, these are sort of like, here's the policy and procedure for, like, how to do the offering. Follow the liturgy and do the thing. And then, make sure the altar is this size. And so you get some law and tabernacle mixed in there from 21 to 31. And then there's Israel's probably greatest moral failure, which would be the golden calf. Right? God has delivered them. God has provided for them. God leads them. Like everyone sees God's presence. Moses is transformed, and they're like, God is here. We should probably worship a cow. And so, Moses is furious. And we'll talk about that and the implications for that, and how it's sort of burned into their psyche, right? They break, like, the first 2 commandments within months, years, whatever, of their wandering. And then the rest of Exodus, we'll talk about it some more. It's some repetition of the tabernacle, which to me raises the question, why? And you could say, well, maybe it was important, or maybe there are multiple traditions, and so they preserved it, right? It's kind of like when you encounter a draft of a paper you might have submitted, and you're like, oh, interesting, I forgot I changed this. And so you have 2 traditions, your early draft and your later draft. And maybe Exodus preserved both. Or maybe they just had told you twice because it was important, and you should probably remember. Repetition. Well, you're okay. All right, let's remind everybody where we are in the world, right? We are not in Indiana anymore, Toto, right? We're not even over here in Egypt. This is where our story began. They have crossed the Red Sea. That's this little slip of water here. And we discovered, right, that the translation of Red Sea could be Reed Sea or Sea of Reeds or Marshy Place. And we know that water levels change. Just go to the East Coast, right? We were in Charleston a few weeks ago, and they were like, oh, the shoreline used to be, here, but we filled it out. And you're like, that's crazy, because we just think that the earth is like as we perceive it, But so who knows how big this body of water was, or conversely, how small it was. Maybe it's gotten larger. And there's some archaeological evidence, and you can dig into that if you're interested, on, well, was it the Red Sea? Was it the Sea of Reeds? Was it a salt marsh? Was it... Knock yourself out, right? But nonetheless, they are over here now, somewhere in this area, what they would call the wilderness or the desert. I've not been, but I'm pretty sure it's about what it looks like. Rocky, arid. There is not a huge lot of farms. It doesn't look like Kokomo, right? This is not Noblesville. This is an arid place, and it's primarily herders. So people who have, flocks of sheep or goats, and they move from one place to another, like Oasis. And there they water, and that's where the wells are. And there are some significant cultural places in Saudi Arabia to be aware of. But that's where we are. So this is the Persian Gulf over here, and we're in this area. So Sinai, or Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, is probably thought to be down here in the south area. But there are a number of locations that have been thought of. All right. I think here's the video. So we'll encounter this together, which will give us bring us up to speed. It's gonna cover some of the stuff we're gonna talk about tonight. How long is it? Can I go get my notes? I'll watch this with you. I'll watch it with you. No, I might go get my notes. Okay. I'm gonna leave this on. So give me a second. Oh, I hope not.
The first half of the book of Exodus tells the story of ancient Israel being rescued from slavery. And when people say the Exodus story, those are the chapters they're referring to.
But the book has a second half where Moses gives the 10 Commandments to Israel along with these instructions about building a sacred tent.
And what links these two halves together is this crucial story. The people of Israel, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They find themselves at the foot of this mountain called Sinai. And here, God's presence comes dramatically down in the form of a violent storm cloud.
Now let's stop a second and talk about this concept of God's presence, because it's really important for the rest of the book. At the beginning of the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, humanity was in God's presence. They had this close relationship with him, and it was good. But humanity rebels, and the relationship is fractured, and access to God's presence is lost. But God promised Abraham that he would restore his blessing to all of the nations, and that includes this restoration of relationship and access to God's presence.
So here at Sinai, God's presence is now right here in front of them, and it's actually quite frightening. And he's here to invite Israel into this unique and close relationship with him.
And the word used to describe this relationship is covenant. It's like a legal agreement between God and Israel. And it's unique because up till now, God hasn't asked Israel to do anything in return, just to trust him. But here on this mountain, God is going to ask Israel to do something. A lot of things, actually. He gives them a whole set of laws. It includes the Ten Commandments. And if they obey these commandments, they will become the people who will represent God to the nations of the world.
Like a priest would.
Yeah, in fact, that's what God calls them to become, a kingdom of priests. And this is all connected back to the promise to Abraham that his family would become a blessing to the nations.
Okay, but obeying these laws is going to be difficult because there's a lot of them, and they set a really high standard.
Though if you think about it, I mean, of anybody in the world who should be able to do it, I mean, it's these people who experienced firsthand God's grace and his power when he rescued them from slavery.
And they agree to obey the terms, but then they refuse to go into God's presence because it's still a bit frightening.
And since the people won't go up, Moses goes up to the mountain by himself to meet with God. But God still wants to be with all of his people. And so he says, okay, if the people won't come up here to me, I'll come down off this mountain to be with you all. And that's why he orders Moses to build this elaborate tent as a place where God's presence can be among his people.
And that's why the next thing we get is 7 chapters of extremely detailed architectural blueprints for this tent. It's really, really, really long.
But every detail is important and has some kind of symbolic value. For example, there's all this Garden of Eden imagery inside the tent. And it's to remind you that when you're in the tent, you are in God's presence.
Then we get another 6 chapters describing how they built the tent, which is really just repeating the same blueprints word for word.
Now let's back up, because before the tent is finished, there's this super important story. Moses is coming off the mountain with the 10 Commandments and the blueprints in his hands, and he finds Israel breaking the first 2 commands of the covenant.
Don't have any other gods before me, and don't worship idol statues.
Right, and so here we are. Immediately after agreeing to the covenant, they're throwing this ritual party, they're worshiping an idol. And so God says to Moses, you know what, this is not going to work. I should just wipe these people out and start over with you.
But Moses reminds God of his promise to Abraham and pleads with God to spare them, which is a really weird conversation. Why would God need to be reminded of something?
Yeah, it does seem odd, but this dialogue is inviting us into God's experience of grief and pain due to Israel's actions, and he really could walk away. But instead, this God chooses faithfulness to his own promises even though he knows it's going to cost him.
So we come to the end of the book. The tabernacle's built, God's presence comes down off the mountain to fill it, and in the final scene, Moses goes to enter the tabernacle to be in God's presence.
But he can't. He's actually not able to go inside, and that's how the book ends.
Why can't he go in? That was the whole point.
So when Israel worshipped the golden calf, it was like a slap in the face to God's faithfulness. And so Moses can't just waltz into the tent like everything's just fine. There's a deeper problem still in this relationship.
Will they ever be able to fix the relationship and go into God's presence?
Well, that's what the next book, Leviticus, is all about.
Leviticus ain't bad, right?
Did you find it?
I dropped my
Oh, okay.
No, we're not. Go away.
Yeah,
Go.
they told us if we wanted to learn some more, we could read Leviticus.
That's true. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna put this chair back so no one trips over it like I did. All right. Thoughts so far? Any questions so far before we hop in here and take a walk through the park together? Any burning curiosities that we should talk about? If you're good, you're good. I just wanted to offer a space.
that I listened to this just about a week ago.
Oh,
Just talking to just
okay.
and as I was listening to it, and I heard God explaining exactly how they were to build the tabernacle, and then Moses goes into talking exactly how they were. Now I thought that my radio was broken.
Yeah, because it just repeats itself.
Yes, very good.
Yes.
That's why I complained last week that it wasn't repetition,
Yeah, you're not wrong.
but it wasn't really totally repetition.
So let's get into it a little bit. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 26, 1 through 37. And if you're online, I just opened up my Bible and I'm going to just read it. I don't have it on slides here in front of us. Thought we could just hear it. So I'll do my best here. This is the entire chapter. So, y'all with me? Okay, Exodus 26. I'll be reading from the NRSV. I don't think there'll be too many differences between our translations because it's words like, cubits and curtains, and we'll get into it. Okay, here we go. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twisted linen and blue, purple, and crimson yarns. You shall make them with cherubim skillfully worked into them. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the width of each curtain 4 cubits. All the curtains shall be of the same size. 5 curtains shall be joined to one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be joined to one another. You shall make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost curtain in the first set, and likewise you shall make loops on the edge of the outermost curtain in the second set. Don't let anyone ever tell you that the Bible's boring, okay? You shall make 50 loops on the one curtain, and you shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is in the second set. The loops shall be opposite one another. You shall make 50 clasps of gold, and join the curtains to one another with the clasps, so that the tabernacle may be one whole. You shall also make curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. You shall make 11 curtains. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the width of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall be of the same size. You shall join 5 curtains by themselves, and 6 curtains by themselves, and the 6th curtain you shall double over at the front of the tent. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in the second set. You shall make 50 clasps of bronze, and put the clasps into the loops, and join the tent together so that it may be one whole. The part that remains of the curtains of the tent, the half curtains that remains, shall hang over the back of the tabernacle. The cubit on the one side and the cubit on the other side of what remains in the length of the curtains of the tent shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle, on this side and that side, to cover it. You shall make for the tent a covering of tanned ram's skins and an outer covering of fine leather. Okay, I'm going to pause for my own sanity. All right. You can see why I might want to provide a visual aid. Yeah, right? Okay. Verse 15, you shall make upright frames of acacia wood for the tabernacle. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the width of each frame. There shall be 2 pegs in each frame to fit the frames together. You shall make these for all the frames of the tabernacle. You shall make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side, and you shall make 40 bases of silver under the 20 frames, 2 bases under the first frames for its 2 pegs, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 pegs. And for the second side of the tabernacle, on the north side, 20 frames, and there are 40 bases of silver, 2 bases under the first frame, and 2 bases under the next frame. And for the rear of the tabernacle westward, you shall make 6 frames. You shall make 2 frames for corners of the tabernacle in the rear. They shall be separate beneath, but joined at the top. At the first ring it shall be the same with both of them. They shall form the 2 corners. And so there shall be 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, 2 bases under the first frame, and 2 bases under the next frame. Verse 26. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames of the one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the side of the tabernacle at the rear westward. 28. The middle bar, halfway up the frame, shall pass through from end to end. You shall overlay the frames with gold, and shall make the rings of gold to hold the bars. and you shall overlay the bars with gold. Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. You shall make a curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen. It shall be made with cherubim skillfully worked into it. We already talked about that, didn't we? You shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, which have hooks of gold and rests on 4 bases of silver. You shall hang the curtain under the clasps, and bring the ark of the covenant in there Bring the ark of the covenant in there within the curtain, and the curtain shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy. You shall put the mercy seat on the ark of the covenant in the most holy place. You shall set the table outside the curtain, and the lampstand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite the table, and you shall put the table on the north side. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and of fine twisted linen, embroidered with needlework. You shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia, and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. And that's just the tent. Okay? It's detailed, isn't it? It's,
I think we should remind ourselves where they got all this material and all this thread and all this gold and silver.
yeah.
Wrong.
So where did they get it?
I remember.
Where might they have gotten it? Walmart. That's right. Blue light special on the gold. Where do you think? Do we remember? They did get it from the Egyptians. Yeah, they plundered the Egyptians, right? So here they are taking the wealth and using it for, right, their place of worship. So here's just some etymology, some of you who like words. Tabernacle, the word itself. The English word tabernacle derives from the Latin tabernaculum, meaning tent or hut. So it doesn't really come from Hebrew or Greek, right? And we will remind ourselves with great clarity that this was written in Hebrew first. And pop quiz, what was it translated into next? Thank you. Into Greek. Okay? Now, to get an undergrad in Bible, you need to know what that's called. What's it called? No. It has a word. Like, you got to Google it. What is the Greek translation of the Hebrew text called? You're close. Yeah, Septuagint. Right? Sometimes it's abbreviated as LXX, and that means the tradition is that there were 70 scholars who translated the Hebrew into Greek. And it was, translated into Greek because they needed to read it and they didn't know Hebrew. So to make mass market paperbacks, they had to translate the Hebrew to the Greek. The Greek was then translated to Latin. Now, to get your undergraduate in Bible, you need to know what that's called. So what's the Latin translation of the Bible called? If you're an ex-Catholic, you might know it. Think back to catechesis. No, it is catechism, but yeah, they would have told you in catechism. It's called the Vulgate. The Vulgate is the Latin translation of the Greek. So it goes Hebrew, right? The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. I tell you all this because the word tabernacle is from the Latin. So sometimes we get these weird words. We talked about this, about like Deuteronomy or other texts. And you're like, wow, where does that even come from? And we need to remember it's probably not from the original Hebrew. It's probably from the Latin or the Greek. So the word tabernacle comes from the Latin tabernaculum, meaning tent or hut, which in ancient Roman religion was a ritual structure, right, for the cult. The Hebrew word mishkan implies dwell, or the verb like to dwell, or a dwelling place. That's literally what it means in Hebrew, or to live in. In Greek, that'd be the Septuagint, right? The Hebrew is translated as skene. They borrowed it from the Semitic language, so it's a loan word. So the Greeks actually don't have a word for tabernacle. They stole it from another language group. So, sorry? To tabernacle Presbyterian? Yeah, it means tent. So, but it really means dwelling or rest or living space, which makes sense. This is where God's presence is. Now, we're not going to talk about this a whole lot tonight, but I want to talk about it now before I forget. Okay, fast forward in your Bible knowledge. Question? Yes? Well, there we go. Thank you. You just segued perfectly. I was getting ready to fast forward a little bit, right? So Solomon's temple is also precise. It'll have detail on how it should be built. And it will be bigger, different, right? Grandiose. Or you could say more revered. I don't know what word you want to use, right? Because I think we all have a different idea of what should the communion chalice be made out of. How many of you seen the Indiana Jones movie, right? When he goes in there and he's looking for the chalice. Right, he takes that one and he dies, it's too showy for Jesus, right? Okay, so what would, some of us would say, no, it should be more humble and earthy. Some of us should say, no, it should be the best materials to sort of conjure up the divine, and you give your best to God. So why wouldn't it be marble and gold and silver and expensive gems? And other people would say, no, you should use those things and sell them and give the money to the poor. And so the details for Solomon's temple, right, are going to be given later, and they are different, but they are, I would say, equally as anal retentive. That would be my little tongue-in-cheek way of talking about it. And that's what I wanted to talk about, is that there are similarities and differences between these two. And the tabernacle serves as sort of a prototype or an archetype, ultimately, for the temple. And what I've always remembered or find fascinating about the tabernacle is these people are wandering. So it's like, if you've ever been a part of when I was in college, we did a church plant at a high school. It was awful, because you got to get there 3 hours before church starts, because you got to roll everything off the trailers, get it into the gymnasium, set it all up, and then you worship, and then you got to tear it all down and get it all back in the trailer and take it back to the church. They did. Yeah, or with pack animals.
That leather covering all by itself would be,
Immense.
that's why they have to have so many Levites.
Yeah. Or, right, you could say that this became more permanent in their wandering. Or maybe it was close to the mountain of God. It's really interesting to read the wilderness wanderings and ask the question, well, how far did they go?
Yeah, but I think that says that certain people were told demanded
To carry certain parts.
carry
Yes. Yes, you're right.
they would carry this, and then somebody else would carry that,
Yep.
and then they get where they were going.
Yep, you are right.
Out in the- they were there 40 years,
40 years.
and nothing more.
Who knows? Who knows these things? Okay, so does that answer your question about the details and the parallels between the two? Now, when you say design like this, what are you asking? Be more permanent in the city? No, I don't believe so. I believe it's different. I believe it's larger. Yeah. And I didn't show, I'm going to let my microphone down, but I'm not going to talk a whole lot here. I'll just show you. So, there's the temple. And it is different. Obviously, even just the structure itself, right? It has, pillars on the front. And there's, a big wash basin that is talked about in 1 Kings.
It's 10 or 12 feet across.
Yes, and there is there's a porch. There's not a porch of the tabernacle, but there's a holy place. So there are similarities, yet I think there are some differences. And if you want to read about the differences, we'll get there eventually, in 10 years. That's mostly in 1 Kings. Yeah. So So what do you think? The question for those online and those who can't hear, why go through such detail if you're not going to reproduce it exactly? Okay, right? So maybe they did want something better. They did the capital campaign, and they were really successful. You know, we raised extra money. So let's just make it bigger. Other ideas? Why? That's right. Whatever they had in the cupboard. Yeah. No. Yeah, I often think that if we were doing the Last Supper nowadays, right, it would be like that plastic cup you get at the restaurant that makes its way into your cupboard and just doesn't go away. That would have been it right there. So do not forget the sort of the thread, pardon the pun, but don't forget the thread from the tabernacle to the temple. The temple is destroyed. The temple is rebuilt. Right? And the thread of the temple in Jesus' life. So Jesus visits the temple during the Passover because you have to offer sacrifice. And a couple key events in Jesus' life, right, where he takes the whip and he drives out the money changers or the money lenders. They're in the temple. He cleanses the temple. And then fast forward, Jesus on the cross, and the veil is torn. So even in the tabernacle, right, you have the veil. And the veil differentiates between the holy place and the most holy place. And so if you're looking on that page right there, you'll see the Ark of the Covenant where God's presence comes down, where the tent is. It might be on page 2. The handout is designed to be opened up and laid out like this, if you've not gotten that yet. And so right here is the curtain, and then that big cloud coming down is God's presence, and then the Ark of the Covenant. You know what Indiana Jones is after? That's right there. That'd be number 10.
And then Jesus had nothing to do with building the temple or the tabernacle.
Nothing.
It was all there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, lest there be confusion.
All of them, all that the king built it.
Yeah.
First of all.
Yeah. God had originally asked, there's some conversation between David and God about building God's house. But then because David, I'll just say, does some stuff and is kind of a warrior king, God's like, you know what? We're going to pass this plan on to somebody else. And so Solomon, David's son, who was born to him out of his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba, is the one who builds the temple. So,
But David was very pure. A lot of the material to build it with.
yeah,
He gets the wood, he gets the gold, he gets, oh my God.
all the supplies. He goes to Home Depot, and he's ready to go. And in a great story that I always remember, too, about tying the tabernacle with some other stories, you all may not know this, you might remember it, that the tabernacle used to be at a different place. There were other holy cities when you read the Old Testament, like Shiloh is a place, I think the word that scholars use is a cultic place of worship. And so Shiloh is like the place where the priests are and where the tabernacle is. At some point in time, the Philistines, those pesky Philistines, they steal the tabernacle. They win it in battle, and they take it. And they're like, can you imagine? This is like when you misplace Jesus in the temple. So they don't misplace it. It gets stolen. It gets taken as booty in a fight, in a battle. They take the Ark of the Covenant, and then eventually they're able to get it back through various means. And as is coming back into the city, David dances, right, out in the streets. He's excited about the Ark of the Covenant. He does. He strips down to his underwear. It's in the Bible. It's exciting. So, all right. So those are some of the connections that I wanted to talk about. So let's just keep going here. We know about the word itself. We've read that. In chapter 25, which we won't read because it's long, but if you wanted to, I'm just going to I'm going to Josh read it. Is that okay? Can I skim it a little bit so we can encounter some things in the text and just kind of hear some of this? Okay, the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to make for me an offering from all whose hearts prompt them, give you receive offering, yada, 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 gold, silver, bronze, blue, yep, keep going on here. We're in 25. I'm going to skip down to verse 10. They shall make an ark of acacia wood. It shall be 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with gold. Inside you shall overlay it, yada, yada, yada. Cast 4 rings, poles of acacia wood. Verse 14. Put poles into the rings on the sides of the ark by which to carry it. The poles will remain with the ark. Yep. How else are you going to carry it? Verse 17. Then you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length. 1.5 cubits its width. Yada, yada, yada. Verse 18. 2 cherubim of gold. You shall make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at the one end and the other cherub at the other end, and 1 piece with the mercy seat. You shall make the cherubim at its 2 ends. Yada, yada, yada. They spread out their wings. They look at each other. There I'll meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, this is verse 22, from between the 2 cherubim that are on the Ark of the Covenant, I will deliver to you all my commands for the Israelites. 23, make a table of acacia wood. Right? 31, make a lampstand of pure gold. The base and shaft of the lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its cup, its calyxes, and its petals shall be of 1 piece with it. There should be 6 branches. This is the menorah. Right? So there are 7 total lights that they light. 34, on the lampstand itself, I'm turning my page, there shall be 4 cups shaped like almonds, blossoms, each with calyxes and petals, yada, 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 yada. And that is it. So chapter 25 tells them how to make the ark, the table, the lampstand, and the incense altar. The incense altar is also detailed in chapter 30. So, I know, riveting things. But this is the furniture that needs to go into the temple. Think about it this way. I always think it's fascinating to think about it in modern terms. Let's say a tornado came through and ripped up the entire church, and we had to rebuild this sucker. You would have to do this work. You would say, okay, well, we're going to put together a committee, and we're going to, let's play around with this a little bit. We're going to build the sanctuary. What do you want in there? You want an altar? What's it need to be made out of? Acacia wood, right? And we might say, well, what's on sale, Or we might say, I've worked at churches where the altar is marble, and you ain't moving it. It is like attached to the foundation. At Westbury in Houston, it's built into the wall. It's not going anywhere. We have you might say a modular setup. You can move the altar forward and backwards. And I know at one point in time, people used to fight over whether or not it was directly underneath the steeple or not. It was, well, okie dokie. But, I know, right? But if the tornado came through and leveled it, we would say, well, what do you want the altar to be made out of? What symbols do you want? Do you want a cross? Do you want a crucifix? Do you want lighting around the cross? Should there be a lampstand? Should you have a Christ candle? What goes on the altar? Do you put the Bible on the altar? Why do we put the Bible on the altar? Well, it's to remind us that we're people of the book. We follow God's word. Why are there two candles out there? Well, one is supposed to represent Christ's divinity, and one is supposed to represent Christ's humanity. We're reminded of the incarnation and the light. So why do the acolytes bring the light into the temple? Right? It's the light of God leading us. The acolytes bring the flame in. It's the pillar of fire leading the Israelites in the wilderness. And then why are the acolytes supposed to take the light out? Because it's God leading you. God's presence doesn't stay in there. God's presence is in the world. That's what Pentecost taught us. Do you see the symbolism in the tabernacle, the temple, and the sanctuary, and how if you had to have these conversations, you might need details like this? So it's interesting to view it from the kind of a modern perspective, Yes. How big should the screens be, and what resolution are the projectors needing to be in? Yes, right? All those things. So there are a few other things in the back half of Exodus I want to talk about. We're not going to read them, but they're in here, and we will look through this together. We'll finish our walk together. But there are priestly vestments That is Exodus 28, 1 through 43. And I'm going to tell you that my priestly vestments don't look like this, guys. Y'all are slacking. All right? I need a breastplate like that. All right? Yeah. I think I've told you this before, but my daughter, my youngest daughter, she goes, Daddy, why do you have so many scarves? And, of course, they're stoles. But I told all my friends, I will always call them pastor scarves from now on. They are no longer stoles. But those serve a function and a purpose. So that's the consecration of the priests in chapter 29, and the vestments are in chapter 28. So for those of you who are taking notes, here's the quick summary and rundown from Exodus 25 through 30. It goes like this. Exodus 25 are the materials needed for the ark, the table, for the 12 showbread, and the menorah, or the lampstand. Exodus 26 is the tabernacle itself. Kind of the bars, all right? That would be like the frames and the partitions, and how they should overlap the goat skin or the yarns and twine to make it. Exodus 27 is the copper altar, the enclosure, and oil. Exodus 28 is vestments for the priests, the ephod, it's called ephod, E-P-H-O-D, garment, tomato, you know. The ephod is the breastplate. So in our handout, it's 2D, or 2.D and 2.E. So the stones are in the breastplate. I think I would say ephod. There's stones in the breastplate, and each of those stones represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's Exodus 28. And then there's the breastplate itself, and there's details about that later. So, okay, I'm just saying, you can do PhD work on this, right? Yes. It's all super, yeah, because it's the best. Yes. And again, it's like we could take a field trip and we could walk in the sanctuary, and there's symbolism everywhere. You just got to open your eyes, right? Even just like the X and the P on the altar. It's the Chi and the Rho, and that's the Greek for Christ. The A and the Omega on the Christ candle. That's the Alpha and the Omega. There's 5 gems on the Christ candle, representing the 5 wounds of Christ. The little red light, right? That's God's presence. That's the lampstand that should never be extinguished. Yes. It would be interesting, wouldn't it? Yes. Yeah. And I've said this before. I think I said it maybe at the sunrise at Easter, that like the idea is if there's bread on the table, right? That's the showbread. If there's bread on the table and the lamp's on, then someone's home. God's here. You're invited in. And that same symbolism is brought into even our practices today, right? The lights are on, the candles are lit, and there's bread on the table, right? And you are invited. And that's what it is. It's a hospitality of God's presence. So, where was I? The ephod garment, the ring settings, blah, 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 the breastplate, the robe, the headplate, the tunic, the turban, the sashes, the pants. Can you imagine? I think so, you know? No, you know, it'd be a little warm in the desert. A little warm. Yes. Okay, Exodus 29 is the consecration of the priests and altar. When our sanctuary was built, right, our cornerstone was consecrated by the bishop. And then Exodus 30, incense altar, wash stand, anointing oil, and incense. It's their church manual, right? Okay, so with our remaining 10 minutes, let's just go through this page by page. And if there's something that catches your attention, just holler. But it is for you to take and digest and read or throw away or give to a friend or do with it what you will. So on this first spread, right, you have the tabernacle here, and it was this large dwelling place for God's presence, right? There is a altar where they would, is a horned altar where they would offer sacrifices, and then a wash basin. And then you have the holy place itself where God was. There was the table of showbread and the lampstand where God's presence was. There was an incense altar in there, and then the holiest of holies which is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and God dwelt in that space. In the Ark of the Covenant, pop quiz, right? Before maybe you've looked ahead. What's in the Ark? The Ten Commandments. Yep, a sample of manna. It's refrigerated, Missy, right? And Aaron's staff is also in there. So, well, who knows? On the next page, page 92 and 93, right, there's the key to the tabernacle, things that I've already done at a high level and revisited for some of y'all. I do want to say one thing about the altar, which I think is something that I didn't realize until I was doing seminary work. If you want to flip back, you'll see how the altar has horns on it. And when I always thought of an altar, like I thought of like a square. You know what I mean? Like our altar is just a rectangle. But it has to have horns on it so that you can tie the sacrifice to it. Yeah, well, neat, right? Because, sacrifices usually are not willing. Just saying it out loud. What? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. You can read the text, and we can argue some other time. So, they are horns so they can tie it to it. Sorry, I remember where I was going with that. There is an obscure text in the Bible about manslaughter, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm pulling this from my back pocket. It's not even on my notes. Y'all know what I'm going to say about this? There's an obscure text where if you were able to cling to the altar, cling to the horn of the altar, you would be pardoned. And so, therefore, the altar has horns, right? So you can tie the sacrifice to it, and you can also cling to it. The parallels, y'all, between the Old Testament and the New Testament are striking. And I really believe that Christ's life comes to a brand new light when the more and more we understand about the Old Testament. I think we'll see this very clearly in Matthew. I think you're going to end up saying, like, this guy sounds like Moses. And I'm going to go, yeah, that's intentional. So, all right, so that's 92 and 93. All right, 94 and 95 has the furniture. There's the bronze altar, the bronze laver, right? Yeah, where you where one laves. The menorah, the table of showbread, altar of incense, and the Ark of the Covenant, and the mercy seat. I think I've talked about this once in a sermon, so I'll say it again because I should use my material more than once. Is that when a king judges from the mercy seat. And so the mercy seat is where God dwells, and it's where God mets out both justice and pardon. And so the cherubim flank that, and that's where God's presence is, and where God's mercy and justice rule from. All right, the veil there, and I've already talked about how that is torn. And some of the symbolism here is that when that veil is torn in the New Testament, when Jesus is crucified, just some of the symbolism is that's where God's presence was, and only the Most High Priest was allowed to go back there. And so when the veil is torn, the access is now unfettered, so to speak. So everyone, or you could say, has access to God's presence by this sacrifice of Christ. Okay, 96 and 97. There you have the garments of the high priest and some interesting details on that. And then you have an aerial view of the tabernacle. It's 100 cubits long. Of course, we all know that to be 150 feet or 46 meters. And then there's the entrance, right, 20 cubits. And then the inner place there with the holy place and the most holy place. Did you all get 97? Yes. We're going to keep going here. So those are some of the sacrifices that should be offered. There's burnt offerings, there's grain offerings, peace offerings. They all serve different functions. Yes. Sin and guilt offerings. So they serve different purposes. So if you sacrifice a goat, do y'all know this? I'm sure you do. I'm going to say it again. So like once a year during Passover and other places, other times, when the priest would put their hand on the offering, and that was the transmission of the people's sin into the offering. and this was called a scapegoat. And that's where we get that word, that it is the sin of the people being transmissioned through the priest into the offering, and then the offering was offered to God, and the people are pardoned. And that's called the scapegoat. So, okay, you can read more about that there. We often think of, I'll read this too. We often think of blood as icky, but blood to the ancients was life, right? And so, if blood is being spilt or used in a cultic manner, it's not seen as like, ew, hydrogen peroxide only takes that out. It was seen as life. And the same way that we would view breasts. In today's world, we might view them very sexually, kind of like pornographic, but to the ancients, that is life, right? Mother's milk was the only way to live. And so blood and milk, other bodily fluids were seen as the stuff of life, not the way that we view it in 2025, or like, ew, cover up, or gross blood, it was vital. All right, 98 there is a good descriptor of the Ark of the Covenant. And then I gave you guys, I think, page 99, which I thought was just fascinating. And I'm just going to read this at a high level real fast for those of you who are online and can't have the handout. It's called The Journey of the Ark of the Covenant from Mount Sinai. So God gives Moses directions to build the Ark of the Covenant. We talked about that. That was Exodus 25. The veil is woven. The Ark is in the tabernacle. The Ark is carried for 40 years in the wilderness. We talked about that, right? And there's Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy that will talk about it. And then the priests carry the Ark across the Jordan River, right? Because they're going to go fight the Battle of Jericho. And God's presence leads them into the Promised Land. And the Ark is where God presides. And so it needs to go ahead of the army. So people build a memorial after the Jordan parts. That's Joshua chapter 4. Look, we're in the book of Joshua. We haven't even read it yet, right? And the Ark is carried around Jericho. Because Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. All right, and the walls came tumbling down. Okay. So, and then after Ai, not artificial intelligence, but Ai, right, the city, the covenant was remembered at Mount Ebal and the tabernacle at Shiloh. I talked a little bit about that. The ark is taken to Bethel, which means house, dwelling. Okay. 11, the Lord speaks to the child Samuel, who's sleeping near the ark at Shiloh. The Philistines take the ark. No! 1 Samuel chapter 4. The Philistines return the ark just 2 chapters later. Yeah, because they're like, get this thing out of here. 14. Men are struck dead by the Lord for looking into the ark. Naughty, naughty. All right, 15. The ark is brought to the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim and stays there for 20 years. Saul brings the ark to war camp temporarily. Saul is the first king of Israel. And he brings it to the war camp because he wants God to sort of like turn the tide of the war. The ark is moved on a cart to the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. Uzzah is struck dead. I think Uzzah is struck dead. This is an obscure story in the Bible, if y'all can't tell. It's 2 Samuel chapter 6. I think Uzzah touches the ark and he's not supposed to. Right? Because only certain people are supposed to touch the ark under certain conditions, and they had to use the poles, and so you can't just touch it. It's God's presence. You're unclean, right? Clean and unclean. Okay, 18. David brings the ark to Jerusalem and places in tent set up for it. And 19. David flees Jerusalem but sends ark back to Jerusalem. And 20. Solomon has ark brought into the most holy place in the temple. 1 Kings chapter 8. And then Josiah recovers the book of the law and puts ark in the temple. And then 22. The prophecy of Jeremiah that the ark would not be thought of or missed, nor will another be made. It will be replaced by the Lord's presence. And then there's some questions. Scholars believe that when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, 586, and plundered the temple, that's when it was destroyed the first time, the ark was either taken by Nebuchadnezzar and destroyed or hidden by Levites. Its existence or location remain uncertain today. It is lost to history. It is gone. Or maybe it's not. It's gone. Oh, who knows these things? I mean, wouldn't that be absolutely wild, if like next week they're like, oh, by the way, we found the ark.
And
No one touch it. Yeah. All right. Questions, thoughts, comments, and curiosities after sort of walking through that together. Yes, sir. No. I need to go back and double check, but I do not think Moses was allowed. It was just the high priest. It would have been Aaron or, one of his descendants. Why? Come on now. Yeah, he doesn't really get a whole lot of limelight, does he? He was his mouthpiece. Yeah. Question, you said but, or an add-on. Aaron does? Well, maybe. Maybe. So there are some interesting reasons about this, and we will encounter some next week. But the role of these two people, it seems like Moses is a prophet. And there seems to be, like, I'll say, a three-pronged role usually in the ancient world. And you'll hear this before, I think, maybe. Is prophet, priest, and king. Prophet, priest, and king. And you usually can't serve in all three capacities. So, like David, he's a king. Solomon is king. Samuel is just a prophet. He's not a priest. He's not a king. So they all have different functions. And I'm not sure what to do with that. You know what I mean? I just know that there are, like, Moses won't even be permitted to go to the promised land. And he's not able to go because of the whole entire water thing. He was supposed to, like, talk to the rock or hit it or hit the rock, and he struck it and he shouldn't have, and God's like, he disobeyed. And Moses, I'm sure, is like, bro, one time? One time, and you're not going to let me? And that's it. I mean, that is it. So Aaron, yeah, he may or may not really mess up. But he gets to go to the Holy of Holies and function in his office, but he doesn't get to do the other stuff that Moses does. Like Moses has a physical transformation. He talks with God, and he comes back, and the people won't engage with him. His skin is glowing. He has, like, horns. Strange passage. It's a very old tradition where Moses encounters God, and people are, like, terrified of him. Aaron doesn't get to do that. That's Moses. Okay, I don't know. It doesn't really answer our questions, right? But it's just they are these wonderings. Like, isn't that interesting? Okay, other curiosities, thoughts? Good? All right. So next week, we will encounter the golden calf. Should be fine, right? And then that'll wrap up Exodus. I really do. I encourage you to kind of just, at the very least, skim it, right? Skim Exodus. The golden calf is in 32? Okay, so if you want to read ahead, this is 32, and there's only 8 more chapters. Again, it's pretty repetitious? Repetitive, that's what I'm looking for. So skim it. It should be interesting. Let me offer a word of prayer for us this evening. God, we give you thanks for showing up so long ago and continuing to showing up today. We pray that we would recognize that your presence is not just in one place, that it ain't over in our sanctuary, but we might find you there, and we might find you at the gas station or Kroger or McDonald's or somewhere in between. So give us eyes to see you at work, and give us a spirit that's your Holy Spirit to guide our steps and follow after you. We pray this all in your Son's name. Amen.